Hi, hello everyone. First of all, it is great to be in Framework. This is a family. This is a family of pixel people. And I think that there is such a big value to what we are doing in here. There is people from manufacturers, creatives. We have people from every single part of the chain to make these shows, these installations, all these things work and create an experience. And for us, it's about how good can that experience be? What can we do to improve it? And luckily for some of us, those who are very involved with LED, we are everywhere, right? LED walls have been in live events for a very long time, and it is getting bigger and bigger. It's not going any smaller. Pixel pitch is finer. Walls are wider. People don't pay only to see the artist now. They want to really have that experience in which they can get all this vision happening. Besides, we are as well in installations. We can see that there are installations all around the world, and the quality of those is getting better and better. And there have been a significant advancement in the technology. Many of them applied specifically for this, but one day, VP arrived. And with virtual production, it's something that I love. I think that this is an incredible industry because suddenly many people from many different parts of the workflow have to talk and communicate and work very, very close together. You have media servers, you have synchronizers, you have networks, you have cameras, lighting, Unreal Engine. You have so many parts that you want to work together. And the fact is that it has not always been ideal. There has been a very steep learning process to make sure that all this looks correct. Because there are some challenges in the way the LED works and how that timing affects cameras. Even with traditional lighting, the cameras work quite well, but then when you get to other types of lighting that blinks, you get some issues, some artifacts. And the LEDs, these panels that you are looking at today, they are actually blinking. Even though we cannot see it, the camera can. So this is an extreme of an effect that many of you might have seen. Many of you that work in the cinema industry, or even any of you that took a phone and put it in front of a screen, might have seen something like this. There is many different ways of seeing that in certain areas of the image. Sometimes they are moving, sometimes they are stationary, sometimes they are bigger, they are smaller, sometimes they are darker, and sometimes what you see is a bright area. But why are those happening? To be honest, all this started because I was in certain conversations with very knowledgeable people in this industry, and I realized that the concept of synchronization actually wasn't that clear. Like, what is Genlock doing in comparison to other ways of synchronization? What are these other ways of synchronization that we can find? So I'm going to start first for how LEDs and cameras look. So an LED is a light, and we will see it in a bit, no worries. I don't want to leave it just like that. But an LED is a light that basically blinks multiple times. And a camera, they have a shutter that opens and closes, taking these blinks. Because these are both timings, there is some issues that you might find. So the LEDs are blinking. They have very rapid cycles of illumination, much faster than what the camera can see. And these cycles interact with the timing of the cameras. The reason why we see LEDs continuously rather than as a blink is because of visual persistence. This is how our brain works. So what happens when the timing is not aligned? Well, what you might see, what we were looking at before, is horizontal banding. Horizontal banding is what you might notice the most immediately. It's these lines that are brighter and darker in the space. I want to add, why is this important actually when you are shooting that you fix it in advance? Well, if you shoot it and the foreground, that this is what virtual production is, the foreground is your normal actors and talents, and they look incredible. But then the background has these artifacts. Post-production is going to have a very hard time fixing it. In the previous example, you can see it all across the screen. That's easy to see. But what if it happened only in certain shades of the signal? What if it happened in certain spaces where it's not that noticeable, and they only notice afterwards? They only notice after the shooting. Things can get very, very expensive very quickly. In some extreme cases, you can see a flicker, whether it is the lighting or it is the LED itself. And actually, if any of you did testing with a slow motion in LED, might have seen that flicker, because when you put a phantom in front, a phantom is a really good camera to see these issues. You can see uneven brightness. It's a little bit less than the horizontal banding itself, but still it is in there and can be noticeable, especially when you move the camera. And then partial scan capture. For those of you that work with media servers, you might have noticed that sometimes the camera just doesn't see anything in the bottom or the top of the LED. It is just a full black space, seeming like a kind of ghosting. And the last will be timing drift. This is the movement that we have seen. That makes it a lot worse. But how LEDs work? This is a very, very common panel. I didn't put the brand, but this panel has been used in multiple productions all around the world. And when we look at the specs, there is so much information in them. You have the things that people pay attention to. The first one, 2.84 millimeters pixel pitch. That's amazing. This is what I want. I want something that is fine pixel pitch. This is the number that most people look at when you are buying panels. They might be looking at how bright they get. This is the next thing that everybody pay attention to. Why? Because it is easy to see. Brightness, it is a very easy concept to understand. But actually, when we are looking at panels from the processing side, when we want the workflows to work and to look incredible in camera, what are we looking at? The refresh rate. How fast are these pixels blinking? How much information can you get out of each of these pixels? The next one, the scan ratio. And we're going to see what this means in a second. But the scan ratio is an extremely important concept when you are looking at your LED panels. So we will focus on those two for now. But first, what is LED processing? How do you control this? This is what happens after you create all your content and pass it through your media server and goes everywhere. Your source goes into an LED processor. The LED processor controls the receiver card, and this receiver card is in each of the panels. And this is how we are controlling this blink of the LEDs. But what does it mean? Well, the LEDs are also blinking. If we look in here, this is exactly what an LED does at a very, very, very slow pace. We have seen before, the panel was 7,600 hertz. This is 7,600 cycles per second. In here, we are doing at the moment around 2 hertz, 1 hertz, 0.5 maybe, 0.5 hertz, and the LED is blinking multiple times in this time. Now, if I can go over here. What happens when you modify the brightness? To modify the brightness, what actually happens is that you modify what we call the duty cycle. How long are these LEDs on to gain that effect? Depending on how long you keep the LED on, the difference between the on time versus the off time, or the light time versus the dark time, you will get an output brightness. And obviously, if we increase this, we get a lot more. And I said that the second most important part was the frequency. Right now we are at 1 hertz, but if I reduce this and we increase the speed, we can see in this example that is not very well synchronized because this is a little app in my computer. But the longer the LED is on, the more lighting is going to output. So we can control how we use this in order to improve the blinking. If we put it extremely fast, we will be able to diminish this blinking and actually show what it happens. But there's a little trick that happens in LED walls. As you can see here, we have many, many panels, right? Each one of these panels is controlled by many chips, and each of these chips is controlling a set of pixels, like you can see in there. So if you look at this square, that will be controlled by one of the chips of the panel. And when you have a very low scan multiplexing, you have a one-to-one. Let me put this at 100%. So one chip will be controlling all these rows at the same time. So one chip will be controlling each of these rows. So we will have 6 chips in this case. But what if you have one chip controlling all of them? This is what's happening in the background. This is how LEDs work. And this is actually very, very common because physically there is not really a lot of space in the back of a panel to put all the amount of chips to control each of the rows of your panel. So it starts going like this. If you have one chip controlling 3 rows, suddenly goes a bit better. And what it means is that the lower the scan multiplexing, the better quality your panel is going to be able to show because it's controlling more rows at the same time, and it can cycle through them a little bit faster and more accurately. Obviously, here, if we modify the speed, we can see how lower multiplexings will give you a better effect to the eyes and to the way they work in time. And this is the most important thing. How do they work and how can they evolve in time? And then you have a camera. And a camera is a very interesting device because a camera opens, records all that information, and keeps it and stores it. And before it opens again, it saves it as a frame and then opens again. So when you are in a very low scan multiplexing, a 1-to-1, it looks quite good. But what happens when you have a 6-to-1 multiplexing? It opens, records all the lines, and then closes. This is if it is perfectly aligned, if it is perfectly synchronized. But how can the synchronization change? Well, I'm going to do a very common thing, that is that the effective refresh rate is much faster, and the shutter frequency is lower. And again, this is a very slow example of what is happening in the background. But can we see how some lines are being read more times than others? And suddenly these lines are very bright. If you multiply this by 1,000, 7,000, 12,000, it creates these lines. And the fact is that it can be completely random. Because if you don't know exactly what is the control of the frequency that you're having of your panels, something that it is quite hidden in the knowledge of this industry, can create many issues. And I guess that most of us that work in a production, at least here, I suffered a lot of pain just because of this. So, what can we do about it? What do we want to do about it? I want to give another example about why the partial reading happens. And this is, for example, if I close my shutter, look at what's happening. Suddenly we are missing one line because there is partially reading each of these lines. And that's why sometimes the bottom of the LED will disappear. It's because the shutter doesn't have time to read these lines and it goes back to the top, okay? And the worst, as I was saying, is when it is moving up and down. Why does it move up and down? What does it do partially readings? How does that work? Well, this is an unsynchronized signal. So we have the on times and the off times. We have the open shutter and the closed shutter. But there is very important things if we look at this, and I shaded the parts that are not being read by the camera. Look at our first frame. We have a whole pulse clean there, and we can see it. Look at the second one. It's reading 1 pulse and a half. And the third one will be reading something else. And the next one, something else. And usually these are periodically. So this is when you see that the bands are moving up or down. It is because the synchronization is incorrect, and it is just periodically moving this. Before we continue with this, what is a gen lock? Because we want to get into how to synchronize these things, and the most common way of synchronizing is gen lock syncs. A gen lock is a clock. Even two signals that they look pretty similar, I will say that they are more or less the same timing, and today, and many of you might have seen it, oh no, but it's working today. I had this in the studio many, many times. Oh no, but it is working. The show is tomorrow. Let's leave it like this. Yeah, but tomorrow is not going to be working. And that's the problem. Why? Because over time, this is an exaggeration, by the way, but over time, what happens is that suddenly it's out. And it will keep moving, and then it will be in again, and it will be out again, and depending on how different it is, these patterns will be changing. So this is very, very important to fix. And if it is working today, but it is not Genlock, if you don't have any tools to actually fix it, it might not be working tomorrow. But what is a Genlock, actually? A Genlock is just a clock. It doesn't frame lock. It doesn't tell you where the frame falls. It just tells you how big is the difference between one frame and the next, to all the devices. Not when, but how. What is the size? So if we look at this from the LED and camera point of view, this is a frame, right? The frame period of one camera is capturing, in this case, 1, 2, 3, and 4 pulses of LED. But we see that it is out of sync. This frame period should be the same as the frame period on top. So what do? As we know that right now is not working, we synchronize it. But this is what the synchronization does. It just makes sure that every single frame is going to be exactly the same length as the frame of the other devices. This applies to all the devices, by the way. I'm not saying that this is unique of LED processing and cameras. This applies to every single device in the workflow of video. But we can see how this can be quite interesting to improve it. And this is why a lot of people see big improvements just by applying Genlock, because at least both devices are working at the same speed. Panels are really fast, so the number of pulses that you get are more or less the same. But it is still not perfect, right? We can see that when this camera opened, the LED was actually off. And then it opened at some point, and then it went off again, and it took half a frame. Then it closed the shutter, and the next one is going to be doing the same. This will still create issues, and it will create differences in brightness. These are the lower ones that we can see. So how can we fix that? Well, now the two frames are the same, right? Phase offset. And this is a tool that some LED processors have, many cameras have as well. It depends on what the tools you are using. These are the things that you might need. How does phase offset affect the signal? What you need to do is to move it so it fits the right position. And now we have phase offset. Now we know that when the frame opens, the pulse is going to be happening. This is going to be working much better. But there is still quite a big issue on it. Look at the dark time when the camera is closed. The dark time is cut, is halved. It's not taking the whole, we call it subcycle. It's not taking the whole subcycle of the LED. And this can still create some issues. And that's why many people are still, even if they're using phase offset and synchronization, they still will find some issues. I want to clarify, by the way, this is extremely simplified. If my engineers heard me, they will kill me, because this is an extremely simplified way of portraying all this. I just would like everybody to understand where are the issues of synchronizing cameras and LEDs. And that's why, for example, we release a tool, and this type of tool called Shutter Sync, what it does is changes this so each subcycle will match the space. And that's very important now that we understand the speed. I want you guys to realize that the amount of brightness is going to be maintained. It's just controlling the frequencies and making sure that these frequencies are going to be matching in each of these spaces. To control exactly the right brightness, you don't want to have changes in brightness because there is changes in frequency, that's for sure. But all the subcycles are exactly within the timing, so we can now avoid any type of artifacts that we might find. And this is the process that we followed. So we know that we have fixed a lot of issues, but there are still some things that we might not be able to fix. And that is, I mean, obviously, I made it very clear. Look at this camera. This is the perfect global shutter that still has not been invented. There is obviously timings that are happening even though we are defining clean cuts. But if you're using a rolling shutter, if it has a slow sensor reading time, all these things are going to affect, because then we are getting into other issues, like the capture of the camera has like an horizontal shape that suddenly is capturing some pixels on the top, and then will be capturing different times of pixels as we go down the screen. So there are many other things that we have to consider and that we can actually fix with technology and knowing how the frequency works. But if you have, for example, a rolling shutter, and you start moving your camera up and down, the physical position of what the camera is reading is extremely difficult to control, and it still might create issues. So, some key takeaways. There is a massive challenge in how these things work together, and understanding at least the basics will help definitely when you are on site. For example, we didn't consider shutters, rolling shutters, as I said before. We didn't consider the brightness of the panel, because the fact is that depending on brightness, because of the electronic capabilities of each panel, when you are at a very, very, very low brightness, you need to reduce the refresh rate in order to be able to display the image that you want to display. And this is for other electronic reasons. You can get many issues, scan lines, flicker, uneven brightness, but you have to align your subcycles properly. And then synchronization can help. All the synchronizations that we talked about, every single stage of that synchronization can give you a better results. But always, whenever you are doing something like this, testing, that's why testing, even if you know that the equipment works together, testing is so important. You change your camera, you're going to have to test it. Some people will be interested in why the same LED looks differently in different cameras, and some artifacts might appear, different types of LED with the same cameras. All these things are going to create a big difference. And that is me. Are there any questions? Please.
What about PTP instead of Genlock?
Absolutely. I mean, PTP, this is next generation of synchronization that is already happening in many cases, and it will fix some of the, I mean, PTP works in a very similar way to synchronization, but it does some sort of frame locking at the same time. Because it is over the network, you might still need some phase offset to improve it, depending on how your network is set up. Anyone in here doesn't know what PTP is, by the way. PTP is basically 2110, that is this revolutionary new technology for video over the network that all the manufacturers like Brompton, we are working in getting integrated in our systems, because it brings many, many benefits, including PTP. I think it's one of the big benefits it brings, because it can send signal to many devices at the same time over a network, and if your network is working correctly, it's actually a very reliable signal. But still doesn't bring you the level of accuracy, because at the end it's control of the flicker of the LED. And that's why I initially was speaking about the receiver cards, because having that device reading and controlling how the panels work themselves, what they are capable to do, and how to divide the timings in order to make it work is very important. So PTP will fix some issues, or will improve some Genlock issues, but still will need a little bit further synchronization.
With Genlock, I'm assuming, forgive me if it's an ignorant question, but we would always want to have tri-level, correct? It wouldn't be a situation where you'd want to go with traditional blackburst.
I mean, it depends on what you're working with. Yes, tri-level will give you a little bit better accuracy depending on which devices you are using, but that's why PTP is coming to the world. I mean, PTP is probably going to be taking a lot of this. In the long term, I mean, synchronization is a completely different session, because we will have times on set where PTP and tri-level Genlock will be in the same space, and we will need to control both from the same device, and how these are working together is a bit of a hurdle. Sorry? You can use PTP with redundancy. You can do redundancy of your PTP signal, because at the end it's a network. So, you know, I think that everything will move at some point towards networks, even though baseband, I mean, for those of you that are very big in 2110, I'm sorry, but the experience of plugging an HDMI, I mean, I just plugged my HDMI in here and it was in there. I didn't do anything, right? And that experience is very, very difficult. So I'm hoping that things like 2110 and IPMX are going to improve, but improve the experience. But still, I think that baseband can do a lot. But PTP is definitely bringing a massive, massive improvement to synchronization.
Hey, I'm a lighting guy who frequently plays with video people. I always find myself asking my video folks to lower the intensity of their wall, probably to a level that they're not happy with. How does that affect what we're talking about? Am I inhibiting them? Am I challenging them more? Or should they just be cool with it?
So, yes, it does. I mean, they should just be cool with it. No, so it's funny enough. I mean, I have a secret that I'm going to make public just now. I'm coming from the audio world, right? I'm a sound guy. But I consider that lighting actually is one of the most important factors in virtual production. Everybody focuses in the design, in the LED panels, in the camera, but lighting is what makes it real. The lighting in the foreground has to be good. I spent, a long time talking about how to set up a studio, and my very first thing always is switch off your LED wall. Your guy has to look good. If you like that, if your guy in the middle doesn't look good, doesn't matter what you do in the background. The background can be whatever. It is all about the talent first. And then, yes, you have to merge it with the background and create all this space. So lighting, actually, I feel like it has a lot of importance and needs to have a strong input in how we do these things. Now, on the other side, it is true that reducing the brightness of your LED wall is going to affect that, the way these pulses work. As you saw when I was doing the demo, the lower the brightness, the smaller the pulse. In very, very low brightness, this pulse is tiny. Now, this tiny pulse, the fact is that it's not a perfect square wave, as you can imagine. Anyone that studied a little bit of electronics know that this is not how the world works. It has a little bit of an in and a little bit of an out. But if it is very small, even though you want to give it the full size, it will not go all the way on. It will go on and on before it can finish being on. Now, that is part of things that are happening, and that's why there is other tools, and we can do next year in framework will be about low brightness performance of LED panels. Low brightness is a big thing for studios. I mean, here clearly we are not a full brightness, otherwise we will all be blind, right? So low brightness is a very, very important thing, and it affects the panels, but you have to, and that's why I said at the beginning that I love this world, because suddenly lighting guys, designers, LED people, and media server guys, we all have to be talking. And the camera, I mean, I'm not even talking about how the camera is being used. We all have to be in good communication and understand what the others want in order to know how much we can sacrifice to make it look as good as possible, that this is what we all want.
Just to your note, I'm also a lighting guy. Bottom line is that a lot of LED wall manufacturers claim their walls are linear. They're not. And no one turns around and tests it on camera. No one puts it on scopes. And that's why I'm doing a talk here at 3:30 on the whole thing. But that's the other element too, and that's why having something like Brompton with the 14-way color and things like this, you can turn around and adjust and calibrate and do all that sort of stuff. But that is something to be conscious of. Is a lot of it, same with LED lights, a lot of them are not linear. And that's the other thing too, it's not just timing, but as you say, when you dim it down, is it actually linear or did it shift? And the other thing too is electronic shift. Nobody talks about that, right? You gotta warm that wall up, you gotta do all this sort of stuff, right? Even in the camera. Anyways, just.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I fully agree. I mean, if we want to get a little bit more into the low brightness, yes, you have to reduce the brightness of your panels, and this is going to have an effect. It's going to have an effect as well in the bit depth, and we didn't get into the depths of the bit depth, right? But it's going to have an effect in bit depth. So that's why, I mean, at least with Brompton, you have some tools. There is a tool that not a lot of people use, even though they have it. If you select your panels and you go to your right bar, there is a operational mode. And in this operation mode, you can select it and it says normal mode or a studio mode. A studio mode almost halves or even more than halves your brightness, because it is important that the panels have a mode in which the maximum brightness is really low for these cases, so that you don't have to fight with the lighting guy.
I'm one step worse than the lighting guys. I'm the executive producer. So extremely dangerous, which is why I come in to listen and get basically educated on a lot of this stuff. I think one of the reasons we formed Framework As I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you were here, but about the heat in the system between the buyer, the executive producer, like myself, the creatives, and the technicians who are running each of the departments. And so what I encourage is that each of you who understand this are able to communicate it in a way that the non-geeks among us can understand it and act as your agent, right? Because as the EP, I am the double agent. I let the client think that I'm working for them, but I'm actually working in defense of you in order that we together are able to please them. So it's really important that if in fact, when you ask, can you turn it down, what you didn't know is that you just threw 3 departments into a hell space for as long as it takes them to respond to that. If in fact that's the case, we need to know that in order to defend your space and say, no, dear client, we're not going to turn down the screen right now, but I'll do it at the next break.
So actually, thank you very much, Soren, because this is exactly it, and this is exactly why I am here today talking about this. And this came from, as I said initially, a conversation with people that is extremely expert, people that I respect incredibly in this industry, and me realizing that this knowledge was not that common, right? I'm not claiming to know. I mean, I have engineers that know really what is behind all these things, but the basics, I think, they are important. And the second part was speaking with Laura, actually. We were having a meeting, and we are talking about what should framework we be about, blah, blah. I wasn't even coming to the show. But in that conversation, I realized that it is important, exactly what you said, to share it in a very, and I hope that it was simple enough. Sorry if it got a bit technical in some points. I hope I tried to work out these tools. I I said ChatGPT, but they work. The first one took me 8 minutes to draft. So it is extremely important, yes, exactly, to have a little bit of this knowledge, because we are in a difficult world. I was talking with some people as well. Right now, getting into this industry of video and virtual production, and you see it everywhere, and everybody's excited. But then when you start, and luckily I didn't start straight into virtual production, right? I had many shows behind and many other things that drove me into this world. But being 20 years old and starting in a world in which you have to know how LEDs work, and media servers, and cameras, and networks, and lighting, and because all these parts are extremely important, and you will have to understand them at some point. That's why I do agree completely with Soren that is something that we have to consider.
So as you talked about the brightness that you set in, let's say, like your processor, right, into Sarah, that's dictating how long that blink of that diode is, right? So as far as the content coming into the processor, does the brightness level of that wouldn't dictate how long that blink is for? It would just be the nit level of your processor? So
the length of this, and I want to insist, this was an extremely simplified version of it, because that happens 7,000, 12,000, 5,000, 3,000 times per second, right? So the length of that is depending on how much is the actual optical output of that LED. And we can talk about the correct brightness workflow, and I will disagree with half the room in how you control brightness in your system, because while yes, you can send lower brightness from the media server, this is going to be the controversial part of the session. If you send lower brightness, for me, you send lower brightness from anywhere else in the system, whether it is the media server, Unreal, or whatever it is, into your LED processor, suddenly your LED processor, instead of having the whole range to work with, has a very reduced range, and this decreases the quality of the signal just because of banding, because you are not sending all that data. So if you put the whole information, 100% brightness, and you go to your waveform input in the signal, and you make sure that the blacks are black and the whites are white, because you have then limited signals and limited range signals and things like this. But if you make sure that everything is in the right place, then you can play with it in the processor side. So while the optical output will be defined by how big these things are, I will still send always 100% of the signal to the LED processor, so we can play with it.
But as far as like artifacting, like if you were to set your processor to full nit level, but your lighting guys like, can we come down? It would be optimal to come down on the content first before adjusting the nit level.
No, it will be the same effect, but with banding.
Okay.
And then we have, because the thing is that in the background we have some tools that can read this input information, realize that some banding is happening because the pixel cannot do it, and we will try to fix it. And we will actually fix it. And the thing is that bit depth is a complete other world, because your video can be 8, 10, 12 bits, right? But your panels usually are like 16-bit. What does it mean? Why the panel has to be 16-bit? So all these things, all the challenges are done automatically in the processor, and that's why you want your complete range. Any other questions?
I had a question.
Yes.
Is there, obviously there are numerous variables to this. Are there good tools for end users to use to simplify that process that you provide?
Do you mean for people on the field?
Yes.
You need to have the right equipment. That's the only tool. And I mean, anyone that works in the industry, I have seen plenty of people trying to use tools like frame remapping without a sync generator that can actually change the phase of your signal. It's going to be impossible, right? You need the right tools. Sadly, at the moment, still you will need the right tools, because the way these panels work and when they are sending information needs to be extremely well controlled, and this is why we do what we do.
My question sort of arises from Soren's point of being able to visually show other people precisely what's going on in your system and getting effectively the demonstration that you provided.
Sorry, can you repeat?
Using tools similar to the way you described that for all of us, being able to use something along those lines from a diagnostic standpoint to provide to producers, et cetera, and say, here's why we're running into what you're running into.
So from a diagnostic point of view, it's a bit difficult, because I mean, these tools, I will have to speak with my team, but I think that they can be perfectly available. It is, again, it was done specifically for this part. I wanted to make it as easy as possible. I understand that sometimes we go all the way to the maximum technicality and we think that this is the best, but you have to really explain people how things work. But for diagnostic itself, it's a bit difficult, because you need something connected to the panel that understands what the panel is actually doing. So you need to have control over the receiver card, basically, because that is, the thing is that it says 7,620 hertz for the panel, right? That is true only in certain cases. Depending on the brightness, this is going to be changing, because you want these cycles to actually fit in the space and all this. So there is many variables that you need to know in order to do it. So as a diagnostic, it's a little bit more difficult, but it is really as easy as just taking the camera information, inputting it into your processor, and they're tweaking a little bit. Shutters are not 100% accurate either. I mean, they open and close, and they tell you that it's 60 hertz, but maybe it's 59.9998, right? This is one of the reasons I love these guys. When you put your edits in these guys, it tells you, oh yeah, we are synchronizing to 59.9997. And you feel like, I did 60. What is happening? And that is because the internal clock of these guys is reading a different timing. And it is just telling you like, okay, this for me is not exactly the same, but I can do it. And so there is a couple of processes in there.
Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you very much. I think we're headed towards lunch next.
Thank you very much, everyone.